Welcome to the Uncommon Podcast, where we discuss real estate, entrepreneurship, leadership, and faith. Thanks for taking the time to sit down with us. I know you've got a lot going on and you're always busy with something, so appreciate taking a few minutes to swing by and hang out with Sam and I. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Glad we're getting this time together.
Yeah, much appreciated. So, Ron, would you mind just giving like a little bit of background, like what it is that you do, what your day job is, and a little family background as well? It would be awesome.
Yeah. My day job is I help people with their money. I help them make wise decisions related to their money. We integrate faith-driven wisdom into the advice that we give. We also do faith-driven investments, so we help them invest in a way that honors God with their money. And we try to help them think bigger than just, am I financially okay? You know, will I be able to retire at the age that I want to retire? Will I be able to spend the money that I want to spend? To really thinking about when I get there, what kind of an impact can I make with my life? Because I think in the end, all of us really want to have made the world a better place because we were here. So I try to ask questions to get people to think about that. I've got a wonderful wife. We've been married for 28 years and a very tolerant wife. I've got 4 kids. My oldest is 25. She's married, and I've got a granddaughter. They live out in Phoenix. I've got a son. Him and his wife live in Pittsburgh. And I've got 2 little ones. I say little, but they're not that little. My daughter is 17. That's at home still, and she's going to be a senior this year. And my little guy is 14, and he's going to be a freshman. And he loves basketball like nothing else you can imagine. He's always got a ball in his hand, as you guys saw just a second ago.
Yeah.
So good stuff.
That's great. So have you been in like the financial world, wealth management for your whole career?
That is pretty much all I've done. Ever since I got out of college, this has been my career.
Okay.
I had a few, various part-time jobs that I did when I was in high school, and was in the Army, National Guard for a few years in high school and college.
Really?
But ever since I graduated college, this is the only thing that I've done. Now 32 years of the same thing. I just do it differently now than I did it when I first got started.
Okay. Yeah, we've known each other for a number of years now, and you've always been very gracious and generous to invest time into our relationship, and I've appreciated that. And one of the things I'm excited to get in with you about today is just your view on both generosity and then I think what you would call impact investing as well, looking into that. So you made the comment just a minute ago that you do your business differently now than you did when you started. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit? Like, what are those differences?
Yeah, I mean, when I first got started in the business, I believe my purpose was to either help rich people stay rich and get richer, or take people from being poor or not as rich to richer. And that was really my main purpose of what I was doing, to help them grow their money. Today, I feel like that's still part of the objective and part of the goal, but I also want them to think about how they're making their money, because that's very important. Yeah. Why would we want to promote things that we would be socially, morally, faith-based opposed to by investing money? And I don't think a lot of people think about that. I think a lot of people don't even know what they own. They own an index fund or they own a mutual fund. They have no idea what's inside that portfolio. And for a number of people, they're promoting things that they would be morally opposed to, that they would not want their kids being involved in. And yet they're making money on it. Tobacco is a very easy one to pick on. Where are the new smokers coming from? They're coming from places like Indonesia, where the average smoker is, that you start smoking at an average age of 10 in Indonesia.
Wow.
And I don't know about you, but I don't think I really thought about my health a heck of a lot when I was 10 years old. And it's shocking to me that they can actually give kids that age a pack of cigarettes or a carton of cigarettes, teach them how to start smoking, and they can pick up the habit at 10 years old. Here in this country, I think I've owned tobacco stocks in the past and thought, well, they're adults making adult decisions, and if that's what they want to do, that's their choice. Just like with alcohol. They're not adults making those decisions, and the kids that are getting started on it are very young kids. And if it's a product that I don't want my own family, owning and working for and producing, why would I want somebody else's kid to get, to pick up something that I wouldn't want my own kid
Hmm.
to pick up. So it's kind of fun to think about the fact that, being generous with money, you can make a big impact by giving money away, but you can probably make just as big or an even bigger impact by how you invest the resources that you have in your hands. Because generally you'll have a lot more wealth that will sit there in your hands than what you'll give away on a regular basis. And all of that money that you've got is promoting something. And if you don't know what it is, I think it's very important to know what it is, because you're creating the future for what your kids are going to be living in.
I love that concept.
Yeah,
I really do.
It's super interesting.
It's funny because on our end of things, we discussed that you are definitely opposed to owning through moral obligation and preference a lot of things that are brick and mortar on the real estate side. You're like, oh, I don't think I would ever own a nightclub, for example. I mean, that's something that you see and you're like, I kind of have an aversion to that, but I don't think you think about that as much as you go into like stock portfolios, index funds, things like that. But it's a really interesting take. I mean, it's the same thing. It's assets that you own. So it's a very, very, very interesting and well thought out approach to going about business. It's fantastic.
How does that work from like analyzing those stocks? Like, are there groups out there that help to bring portfolios together, or do you have a team that works on that, or how do you identify which piece of the portfolio adhere to that guideline and which ones don't?
Yeah, there are resources out there that you can use to really figure out what are your assets promoting.
Okay.
What causes are you advancing? So there's a number of different places you can go to do that. One resource that I can think of off the top of my head is through Inspire Investing. They've got a tool where you can go in and you can put your current portfolio into their tool, and it will tell you how much of your money is promoting things that you may be opposed to. And it'll even break it down into categories. So maybe it's tobacco, maybe it's pornography, anti-family things. It'd give you a chance to really see how much of what you own is against who you actually are as a person.
That's super
And
interesting.
yeah, that's just one tool. There's lots and lots of them, but we hire money managers that look at those closely before they invest our money. And it's the cool thing that keeps happening in this area of investing is there's nuances now. So now you can actually own some of those companies that maybe you would say, I don't like everything that they're doing. Maybe they're giving to causes I'm opposed to. But to get a voice in that company, to be able to go to a shareholder meeting and say, hey, we understand you have shareholders that want you to do, and give to this cause.
Yeah.
And they're speaking loudly and they're telling you you're a bad organization if you won't give to it. Well, guess what? There's people on the other side of that coin that have different values than the people who are speaking up. You need to please both shareholders. And you as a board of directors, your job is to create profits and get them out to the shareholders. So as opposed to giving to something that half of your investors would be opposed to, how about just divvying out the profits to the people that actually own the company? And if they want to give that money to whatever cause they so choose, great. But you as a company, you don't need to socially tell me what I should believe. I can figure that out myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't take one side as opposed to the other. So even owning some companies, if you have the right organization helping you own those, can still promote your values, even if right now they're not doing it exactly the way you would like. So you can be a part of the change in that company to make it into an organization doing things that you can feel good about, or at least stopping them from doing things you're opposed to, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. That's really interesting. You mentioned a link which we can put in the show notes. Was it Inspire?
Yep, Inspire Investing has a tool.
Okay.
And we also on our website have the ability to do that for people too, where if they send us their portfolio, we can send them the research report to show them exactly what they own that they may be preferring not to own.
Okay. And what is the website to your?
Ours is Plan A WM as in wealthmanagement.com.
Okay. We'll put that in show notes as well, just so we have that link. I bet, are people pretty surprised when they put their portfolio in and see what they actually own?
Absolutely, because nobody thinks about it anymore. It's just it's this black box that you throw money into, and all you care about is what kind of a return it kicks out to you. In 20, 30 years ago, you'd owned individual securities. You knew what those companies did. And, when you saw something going on with them, you were like, oh, that's great, or that's terrible. Right now, nobody knows that. They're just like, well, if the market profits, I profit. but what are you profiting from?
Yeah.
Another cool nuance to that was not out there before, you can do what they call direct indexing, where you can say, these are my values, these are things that I would prefer not to profit from, and they can actually go in there. One of the money managers we use can go in there and they can take out companies that are promoting things that you're opposed to, and they've done studies that show that your difference in return is basically non-existent. So you can get rid of almost 20% of things of your portfolio, avoiding profiting from things you'd be sad to profit from, and you don't have to make less money, which is pretty cool. You can actually do good with your money and do well.
That's really interesting. How did you, obviously you've been in this business for a while, but it feels a little bit like countercultural to the business to look at it through this lens. So how did you come to this realization in this position on how you choose to invest your and your clients' money?
The way I came upon the conclusion that this is the way that I wanted to do things. I mean, first my eyes had to be open to the fact it was even an option. And I think most people of faith have no clue that they can invest and promote things that they would feel good about and avoid things that they would be opposed to. I just think most people have no idea that that's an option. And I was in that boat for a long time too. I got in the business in 1992, and I think it was probably about 2008 before I realized that you could actually screen your portfolio and promote certain causes. Once I figured that out, it really got me starting to think. The way I look at money and people of faith, I think the way most people of faith, when they think about it, we don't own the money. We're stewards of it. The cattle on 1,000 hills are God's, and so is the gold. We simply are asked to oversee that while we're here. It's entrusted to us to promote his causes. And looking at it that way and saying, why would I put money in something that I know would harm God's children? Would he be pleased with that? And I think we all know the answer to that question is, of course he wouldn't. He wouldn't want us to harm, something he loves. So if we look at the money and say, this, yes, it shows up in my bank account, but when I'm gone, it all goes somewhere other than me.
Yeah.
And I can say, well, gee, I built all this wealth myself by working so hard and making all these smart decisions. Who created my brain? It wasn't me. I didn't build it as a science project.
Yeah.
God gave me the wisdom that I have, and you the wisdom that you have. And same thing, Sam. I mean, he gives all of that to us. And if we look at the money and the wealth he entrusts to us as his, if we're his steward, we may make decisions a lot different than we do if we think it's ours.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm kind of curious to go put my portfolio into that website now and see, because it's just, and the money managers I've worked with in the past, really, really great people, and we've got good relationships. But it definitely doesn't feel like a topic of conversation that comes up very often. And just honestly lack of even knowing that's even a possibility of how you can invest your money. And when yield doesn't really seem to be impacted at all, why not invest with something that aligns a bit more with your morals? And like you said, these corporations are motivated by shareholder interests. And so if their shareholders are encouraging them to maybe move a particular direction, is that what it sounds like?
Yeah.
So I imagine, are there groups, collective groups that come together to try to influence policy in some of these organizations, or what does that look like?
They'll actually go to the shareholder meetings. They'll do shareholder resolutions to let them know what they want them to change in the organization. And because they're a shareholder, they get a voice in that organization. They may go to the annual meeting, and when they open up the floor for people to ask questions, one of the representatives may go up there, ask the question, and the company has to answer the question from everyone. And then they find out that a lot of people may be opposed to some of the things that they're doing. And that gives them an opportunity to, number one, hear it, because they don't realize it. They hear from one side saying, hey, I want you to do this. But they don't realize it, and don't think about the fact that there's another side that feels completely different than they do. And once they hear that, again, their job is to maximize profits and get it to shareholders. It's not to promote one agenda over another agenda, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah, just creating the awareness around those things seems like a really big, because even me sitting here and thinking I somewhat sophisticated in my investing, not even knowing that really outside of our conversation is knowing that's even a possibility to be able to influence in that way.
And I think that's part of the problem is most people don't know. Hopefully when they do know, what they do is they go back to their advisor and say, hey, I care what I'm profiting from.
Mm.
And if you have the tools saying, these are some of the things you own, and you can go back to your advisor and say, I don't want to own these. I want you to do something different with my portfolio. I want you to change how you're doing your investing for other people too, because I don't want you promoting causes that I'm opposed to. That, I think, is what gets the advisors, people like me, to say, this matters. This makes a difference.
Yeah.
And if I want to keep my clients, I at least need to, very minimum, make them aware that they have the ability to do this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people like me in the advising world that are people of faith. It's just easier not to talk about it. You know, life's going good. Why would I screw it up? Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but again, if we want to give our clients the best of what's out there and give them the chance to vote with their dollars, we have to inform them. And if their clients come and say, I want this, and I want you to tell me about it, and if they can't answer those questions, you know, give it some hard thought as to who you have helping you. And that doesn't make them bad people. They're still good people, but they're not going to change unless people that have money with them ask them to change.
It's an interesting concept too, in the conversation of, I think a lot of times ministry, fellowship, and finances, those things are completely isolated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a way for all of those things to commingle, both in a fashion of communicating with your wealth advisors and also the effect that your dollars actually have on companies. I mean, at shareholder meetings, when there's difficult discussions actually being had on investor preference, that's a way for a ministry footprint to actually happen.
Yeah.
And they're actually, I mean, to your point, change actually occur, or at least the possibility of change to occur.
Yeah.
You're at least introducing a conversation, which is, it's so often in our times in the marketplace, those things are so isolated. You know, don't talk about, you know, faith and politics. Those are the two things you don't talk about in the corporate environment. But when you're able to do it, commingle it, and as you said, not compromise on returns or performance, I mean, it's just a win-win. It's a win for everybody.
Yeah. And you mentioned some corporations may change what they're doing. There are corporations that have changed what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and big names. You know, you would say, gee, I'm a small investor. I don't have that much money. I can't make much of an impact. But by organizations like Inspire going to these meetings, companies like Exxon and Costco have actually changed some of the places that they have given their charitable dollars to just because someone was willing to speak up and let them hear the other side of the equation. And for people that are interested in this and want to be more educated on it, a book I would recommend would be Investing with Integrity by Lauren Graham. I just think he does a terrific job of putting it into very common sense, you know, to where somebody can read it and say, this completely makes sense. Why would I not do things this way?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, I just finished reading it. I've read it before. I was just rereading it. Really well-written book by a gentleman from Spokane named Lauren Graham. Great book.
Okay. Yeah, let's add that to show notes too, so people have resources for
let's do
that. So one of the things, obviously, you're talking about through the lens of generosity, which I know is a huge, huge thing for you. And one of the reasons I love talking with you, because I always feel a sense of conviction around it, and just you prioritize it so well. But so we talked about the investing side and how you can steward your investment dollars. But maybe on the other side of that coin, with like your profits and the proceeds and the income that you're making, can you talk a little bit about your view on the biblical sense of generosity and how you talk about that with clients, and even personally, how you view generosity?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, a lot of people use the excuse today that we're saved by grace, you know, and we're not under the rules of the law anymore. And I think people use that as an excuse not to be generous with their money. And I hate to see that, because I think God desires to bless us when he knows he can trust us with the resources that he puts into our hands. You know, he says you'll reap based upon, you know, how you sow. And if you want to reap bountifully, you need to, you know, give bountifully. And if you're stingy, your harvest is not going to be what it could have been. One of my favorite verses related to generosity, and one that really sticks out to me, is Malachi 3:10-12. And it basically says, bring the tithes into my storehouse, and then if you do, I will pour out a blessing so great you'll have a hard time taking it in. And it says, try it, put me to the test. And it basically says, I'll take care of your stuff. Your grapes won't fall from the vine before they're ripe. And nations will, all nations will notice that you're blessed. So what's the system there? I think the system is to give. God will bless you. And then he's basically daring you. He says, try it, put me to the test. I'm going to pour out a blessing on you. And I got your stuff. Stop worrying about your stuff. Stop worrying about this, 10% or whatever you're giving away. Stop worrying about it. I got your stuff. And I'm going to take such good care of you. People are going to notice that you're blessed. I think if we follow his systems and his patterns and the things that he's asking us to do, his desire is, and I'm not saying that's going to be money. I'm not suggesting that you give money and now you get a whole bunch more money back. He could bless you in that way. He could give you a great family. He could, give you favor in all kinds of different ways that you don't realize. But I won't believe for a second that if we're trying to honor him with our generosity, if we're trying to honor him with our wealth, that he's not going to reach to the ends of the earth, to bless us. It says he looks to and fro, trying to find someone whose heart is, completely committed to him. So yeah, I love the generosity piece. I find it very life-giving. Someone who is stingy, I think you just miss out on a lot of life. A lot of that real life that God wants to give you.
Yeah. So I think as Christians, we kind of grew up with the 10%. Right. Yep. You give 10%. That's you check the box. Right. It sounds like maybe your approach may not be quite as linear as that. Do you have a number that you encourage people to say you should give this much? Is it more of a heart component? I mean, how do you approach that issue?
Myself personally, I try to ask God, what does God want me to give? Okay. I like the rules. It makes it simple. It makes it easy. When I started giving at the tithe level, I thought it was great. It was nice and simple. I could do the math, calculate it out, and boom, I know what I need to give each year. But God took my business and grew it substantially. I think it was 2007, and basically doubled my income. And I looked around and I thought, what am I going to do with this extra money? I'm used to saving a certain amount. I'm used to giving a certain amount away. I thought, well, I can buy a nicer house. I can buy a nicer car. I can take better vacations. None of it gave me peace, and none of it made me feel like this is what I'm supposed to do with this extra money that God's put into my hands. So I talked to a number of pastors and I said, okay, is there another rule? 10% was kind of the spot that I understood. But, when God blesses your income and doubles it, what are you supposed to do in that year? I said, do you take it 15? Do you take it to 20? And they're like, there is no rule. So they told me about an organization called Generous Giving. And it's a group of very generous individuals that get together doing crazy radical things on the generosity front, giving away, 20, 30, 50, 70% of their income on an annual basis.
Wow.
And I sat in that and listened to all these people tell their stories. I was so encouraged. We had great preachers and great speakers there. And then at the end, we stopped for 10, 15 minutes to just listen. And the idea was to listen to, what does God want you to do? I'd never thought about that in a million years, to ask God, what does he want me to do with the money? And he laid a number on my heart in addition to the tithe that I was giving. And I was like, okay, great. I'll do that. So I gave it away. And it was coincidentally March of 2009, which was basically the bottom of the stock market when it dropped over 50%. I laughingly looked at the stock that the company I worked for, and their stock had gotten clobbered. Somebody called me and said, hey, what do you think of it? And I couldn't give them advice on it because of certain securities rules. But I was like, this looks really cheap. So I bought it. I took I took the same dollar amount put into that stock that I gave away that same day. God basically took that money that I put in that stock. 2 weeks later, he had replaced that extra dollar amount that he asked me to give away.
Wow.
2 months later, he had brought it up a bunch more. And it wasn't that he replaced the money that was so great. It was the idea that he was saying, you heard me, and I'm in control of how much money you have. You think you are, by all your hard work and, making wise decisions, but I control what comes in and out. I control who becomes a client of yours, who you serve. And I can replace money in your account anytime I want to with such incredible ease, it's not even funny. I mean, just like that. And I've seen him do it a number of other times. And there's times where I haven't, seen it replaced.
Yeah.
But the idea that it's his money, my job is to listen, be obedient, and act. And it's been a fun little journey related to that.
The relationship, just always talking with you, that you have with, I feel like with God, it feels very communicative. I mean, it just seems to be like you ask for clarity, you ask for wisdom. It's just very it's very direct in a way where, at least for myself, it feels like I have to say a prayer, and the more, Old Testament I can make it sound, like the bit more holy it is, and the closer to God that I get. And when in reality, a lot of times it seems like God as our Father, He just wants us to have a conversation with Him. Yeah. And that's something that I just really respect that you've seemed to really have developed over your time. I'm curious, like, where does that come from? Like that willingness and that ability to just ask God, almost as a child asks a father. Was that something like overnight you just figured out? Was it through a relationship, through mentors? Like where did that come from?
Yeah, it came from a lot of different places. A lot of them would have been mentors, reading books, just ideas that I got from some of those different places regarding coming to God with my requests. And really my desire is to try to do what He wants me to do. And my belief is, and I think He answers when I say, I don't have an agenda with this. I'm going to do what you tell me to do. If you're telling me to give away more money, or you're telling me to, sign this business deal, I'm going to do it, even if it doesn't make sense. Because I know some of the ones that I've done have made absolutely no sense mathematically, financially, and that's the field I'm in. So I can look at it and say, this doesn't make any sense, but I believe this is what God wants me to do. And I believe if I'm trying to honor Him with my decisions, this is what I need to do. And for whatever reason, He blesses it. When I was building the building where my offices are at, it was April of 2020, right after COVID hit. Nobody's going into offices. Even the guy who was building the building called me and said, "Are you sure you want to do this right now?" And I felt like God was saying, "Be bold and courageous." And I thought, you know what? He can take it away, because I've seen Him put it in my account whenever He wants to. He can take it away just as fast. If I'm not doing what I believe He wants me to do, why would He bless it? And just speaking of, where do some of these ideas come from? I was at a conference, and one gentleman gave me an idea on a breakout session I sat in on. He called it company paid quiet time. So when his employees come in, he gives them 30 minutes a day. Spend a little time praying, get into God's word, read a chapter, a couple of verses, kind of meditate, think about it, look at their calendar, pray over their day, and then just quietly listen and write down whatever ideas come to their head. I try to do that most mornings, that same pattern, and I write down whatever ideas come to my head. And almost always it's God encouraging me on something, saying, hang in there. I've got this. I have your back. You can trust me. Just take the next step. I mean, those types of things are what I hear on a regular basis. I think we're afraid sometimes if we get quiet and we get alone with God that He's going to bring up all the stupid stuff that we've done. That's never been my experience. My experience has been He wants us to stay on track. He wants to encourage us, and He loves us. I mean, just like your dad forgetting the stupid things you did, He just wants to hang out with you and keep you on the right track.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, it truly is inspirational, and just the ability, and I want to talk about rest as well, because that's something that Sam and I are always talking about, but you just create this space for God to be able to speak. And maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, how have you brought this concept of rest, or whether it's Sabbath or if it's this 30 minutes a day, what are some of the inspirations for why you've done those things, and what are some tools that you've developed to be able to create that space to actually listen to what God has to say for you?
I think the rest piece is one that almost everybody's missing. And I think it's one that I've missed for years and years and years. Our American culture tells us the harder you work, the more successful you'll be. And again, my belief is if I go by God's system and rhythm of life, He can bless me as much as He wants to in as short a time as He wants me to. And He's made it pretty obvious as to what He would like us to do. He's made it one of the 10 commandments. I mean, it's the fourth one. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. 6 days for ordinary work, 1 day for complete rest. So just looking over that and thinking, well, gosh, he's got this in the same list as do not commit adultery, do not murder, have no other guys before me. I mean, it's pretty high on his priority list.
Yeah.
But we as a culture don't value rest. We value hard work and, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Some of the places that I've gone to get some of those tools, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. He's got a website out there. It's got some great stuff on there. You can create your own Sabbath plan. And to me, that's where a lot of the magic comes from, is just having a strategy. If I have a strategy and something that I've put into place that I can implement on a weekly basis, then I know if I'm achieving what I was trying to achieve or not. And I've found, once I put that together, I like this, a starting ritual and a finishing ritual, something to where, okay, this day's different. This day is supposed to be different than other days. I'm not supposed to, try to accomplish something today. I'm supposed to just enjoy, the day. I think that's one of the things that we miss, or I miss in particular, is I don't do a good enough job of enjoying. And I think that is one thing that is huge on God's priority list. He wants us as believers to enjoy our lives. He wants us to have rich and satisfying lives, like he talks about in John 10:10. I mean, if you take a look at Ecclesiastes, he talks all over the place about it's good to, enjoy good food, and good wine, and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Those are good things. He even says that it's good to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it. So a lot of these things that we are enjoying, it's good for us to enjoy it. He wants us to have fun. He wants us to be generous, but he's also given it to us so that we can richly enjoy the things that he's put in our hands. And I think one of those gifts that we can, or most people continue to not open, is the gift of rest. What we get with rest is we get time with people that are important to us. We get to have conversations that we would never have if we didn't take that time to slow down, to rest. If we're always in the, I'm going to achieve more, I need to do this, I need to do that. And again, I'm speaking from experience. That is who I am. And I believe some of us are created to achieve a lot.
Yeah.
But I still think that we're supposed to stop. And I think God's made that as obvious as humanly possible. I mean, I don't know if it was Genesis 2 when he rested after creating the earth. I mean, he didn't need a break.
Yeah.
But he said he was refreshed after he did it.
Yeah.
And, he set a pattern for us so that we would follow that pattern. And to me, it becomes a belief system. Do we believe that we can accomplish as much in 6 days a week by going by God's pattern as we could by going by man's pattern, working 7 days a week? And I know there's been studies done on it. And I think one of the cool ones that I've heard about is Seventh-day Adventists. They, are very good at taking a Sabbath day.
Yeah.
And if you look at the statistics over an 80-year life expectancy and 52 Sundays or Saturdays, I believe is what the Seventh-day Adventists do. If you take a Sabbath, that adds up to 11 years over the course of life. And they live an average of 11 years longer than the rest of the population, which is pretty interesting. So did it really cost them those days off?
Yeah.
Looks to me like God's giving them back to them. So it's pretty cool.
I've never heard that.
That is interesting. I've never heard of that either.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that. I want to touch on a couple things that you said. A lot of people have a really difficult time, Alex kind of alluded to it, identifying blessing, because one of the easiest ways to identify blessing would be wealth. I gave this certain amount back, or I gave this certain amount to something, and now God's blessing me with this certain amount back, or he's improving my quality of life in this way, or he's given me all these things. What would you say, or what would be your encouragement to somebody who has been faithful and has been generous, but may not be receiving those direct, call it a financial blessing? Because I think a lot of times we as humans, we get so buried into these gutters of how we want to see our preferred blessing received versus what God actually has in his infinite wisdom planned for our lives. And so how, because I'm sure that's a conversation that's been had before, whether it's through clients or either through people that view you as a mentor, I can speak to that one of the greatest blessings is my wife and my family and my nuclear family growing up. I mean, my brothers and my parents, that's probably the biggest blessing that I'll receive on this side of heaven. So I want to hear what you have to say about ways you've seen other people be blessed through staying faithful to God's rhythm for giving that are maybe external of finances specifically.
Yeah. I think you mentioned some of them perfectly. I mean, an understanding wife, a wife that is supportive. You know, you guys are in business, I'm in business. I think a big part of the reason that we're in business and we've been lucky enough to have some success at it is because we have someone that encourages us, someone that doesn't say, I think this is too big a risk. I don't think we should try it. Our spouses are probably saying, I believe in you. I think you can do it. And that little bit of, flame to our fire is what gives us the courage to go out there and actually do it. And, an understanding wife, a faithful wife is a gift from above. And kids, the same way. And as you mentioned, being raised in a family that desired to honor God and, you had a safe environment to grow up in, all of those things are gifts from God. And just the little things, on Sabbath when I sit outside sometimes, and there's another great example of a non-financial blessing is a day of rest that he wants us to actually enjoy our lives, that he mentions it all over the place. Just looking around and appreciating all of the goodness that is around us. We're out at our lake place right now. And early in the morning, I like to jump on the sup board and go around the lake. And I see deer, drinking water. I hear all the birds chirping. And it sounds silly, listening to birds chirp, but it's pretty amazing when you listen to them. And when you see, birds flying by together. I remember at the rest retreat that I host, I was talking about, some of God's blessings and how he gives you those little glimpses of his goodness. And a hummingbird came and stopped and basically buzzed right in front of my eyes. And it's like, that's pretty cool. You see that tiny little thing and its wings going 100 miles an hour. And it's like those little gifts, we miss so many of them if we're so busy and we're not looking for them. Good health. There's another great gift. If you've got good health, that's a gift. Understanding wife, a great family, but all of those things, are God's blessings on us. And I think we don't even realize God gives us what he can trust us with. So, maybe the reason he's not giving us more wealth is because he knows this is the level that is right for us. And he doesn't want to ruin us by giving us more than is the right amount for us. And his desire is to give us, the desires of our heart is what he wants to do. And I don't think we're honestly smart enough to know what the actual desires of our heart are. So I think if we look around and say, what is good that is going on right now? I think we see his goodness everywhere that we turn. And those blessings are there.
I really like that. Another not counter, but something people may not experience the same. I don't think it's uniform. Is I love how you talk about you feel God pulling you in certain directions. How has that displayed itself over time? I mean, is that something where you feel like it's engaging in prayer, where you feel like you are having it's conversational, where you're very intently praying over a certain thing, and you get this you get a feeling of peace about a decision, or it's something that is occurring in life through divine coincidence, where there's signs of things happening, or because I think that's an interesting point of conversation. You have preference all over with different theologies, and there's more legalist stuff, there's more charismatic stuff. How and some of those preferences are going to be bound by what your ability to believe, God's capable of interacting with you in a very direct manner. What are some of those experiences that you've had through key decisions in your life, and maybe certain prayers that you've really struggled with, and maybe they've been immediate 5-minute conversations, and maybe they've been 5-year prayers that have come to fruition, or maybe not fruition, but you at least had a solid answer of, I've been struggling with this, and here's the evidence of it.
I think the divine coincidences you just mentioned, so many people can just brush that off and say, it's a coincidence. It's nothing more than that. I don't think there's any coincidences out there. I think a lot of the stuff that happens is supposed to happen. Almost everything is supposed to happen. I was trying to narrow down the different money managers that I chose to offer to my clients, and I'm looking for 3 different options. And as I'm praying about it, thinking about it, I started to review my journals from the past few years. And I'm praying about it one morning and I'm reviewing my journal. And right after I get done praying, one of the money managers I had listed in my journal from meeting someone who worked for them at a retreat that I was at in Wyoming. Could it be a coincidence that just accidentally I was on that exact day, right after I get done praying, show me who you want me to use. I'll do what you want me to do. And then, of course, I jump to my journal, I do some reading, and boom, there they are listed right there. I find that pretty hard to imagine that was just a coincidence, but a lot of other people could say, what a neat coincidence. It was there because it was supposed to be there, because he knew I was going to be asking at that particular time, and he knew how far to have me read in it before, so I got to the right place. Another example I can think of, I try to get away 2 or 3 times a year for 3 or 4 days just to be quiet and alone with God, to really get his direction for what he wants me to do with my life and my time and what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. I was out in Colorado and I was fasting before I went away on the retreat. And I think I'm on my 4th or 5th day of not eating. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty hungry. And I know there's some great restaurants here that I want to go to. And I'm like, okay, God, I will fast longer if you want me to, but I really need to know that this is pleasing you, because I'd like to go eat. And of course, I start reading in my Bible, and it's talking about the fact that it's not if you fast, it's when you fast. And it's like, well, could that have been another coincidence? Sure, it could have been a coincidence. No way. There's no way it was a coincidence. God had it there because he knew I was going to be hungry. I was going to be thinking about it. And I just wanted to know, if I'm sacrificing, is it actually pleasing to you? And sure enough, I mean, I can think of an example when we had dinner the other night. We're sitting there and one of my friends is going to be adopting into their family. They're going to actually get a whole family unit from Costa Rica. And I was praying about whether I should give some money to support them adopting. And you were telling me a little bit about your family, and then you talked about how it got completed when your family was able to adopt. Mm-hmm. And that was just a little glimpse God was giving me of what he was trying to do with this family, was help complete that family. Mm. And I love it when he gives you those little glimpses into the fact that you heard me, and look at what you can, what I'm allowing you to be a part of. I love those things. I was encouraged a few years back to give to a ministry down in La Paz, Mexico. And this gentleman has a kayaking ministry. And he takes out native Mexicans and shares the gospel with them, kayaking. And I felt encouraged to give some money to the organization. And he was running a kind of like a Bible study one night and telling them that, he believes God will provide everything that he needs. And he doesn't believe he's going to have a yacht because he doesn't need a yacht, but he needs new kayaks. And he believes God's going to provide new kayaks. I had just given that previous day for his kayaks. He didn't realize it was, that it happened yet. So the next time he got together with them, he got to say, God provided the kayaks. Hmm. So I love those little glimpses that God gives us that, yeah, you heard him. Mm-hmm. And you get a little glimpse at what he is going to do with what your faithfulness was allowed to achieve. I think
it's amazing I always use sporting references, but the muscle memory that's the word that I would coin, obeying God's rhythm is an activity, and it becomes easier the more that you do it. Similar to diving into scripture, the more you're in scripture, the more you're able to actually hear what God has to say, because he's telling you right there, this is actually what I'm saying. It's not just something that you feel or something you heard on the radio. This is the evidence that I have to give you in this sound, displaying my voice to everybody. So some of those things, I just think it's worth acknowledging that you have an ability and you've done so well creating this rhythm and following this, not creating it, but following the rhythm that God has set out. And I think you have such an engaging experience with God because, you're following a lot of those steps. So I think, some people that may think, well, it's easy for some people. It's kind of it's a byproduct of doing the work, I guess, is what you could say. That'd be a way to coin that. But following the rhythm and actually listening and saying, well, you want me to do this, so I'm going to do it. And then that may lead to certain things. But I know I feel the most separated in my relationship with God when I'm not in Scripture. It's just like talking, or I'm not as prayer heavy, So some of those things, you're not as generous. Maybe you start to feel there's a sense of pride that's creeping in, and maybe you want more versus how can I give more type of a thing. So
yeah,
acknowledging all of those things and just saying, kudos. It's amazing what you've done, and it's a true privilege to sit 3 feet across from you and just listen and hear the testimony, because it's incredible and encouraging, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
I just comment on what you said. It's what God's done. He's allowed me to be a part of it. And I feel very fortunate that he wants to communicate to all of us. And I think once we decide that we're going to be obedient, I think we start to hear it more. And when he speaks and then we do what he asks us to do, then I just think we notice it more when he talks to us. And speaking of generosity, and I may have mentioned this to you guys before, but we ended up buying a lake house that we talked about just a second ago, back in 2020, and I was compiling the money to put into that lake house. And strangely enough, I get a check in the mail that I was not expecting. I thought it was actually incorrect, from the company I used to work for some deferred compensation I had, which I wasn't supposed to get. Somebody else sued that company, and they paid out the deferred compensation to them. And then they also paid out the deferred compensation that they really didn't owe me in my mind, and they legitimately didn't owe me. But I got a check in the mail for 6 figures that coincidentally, that with my vacation fund that I have inside of another account, came almost to the exact dollar amount that I needed to buy my portion of that vacation home. So, God is so incredibly generous. For him to do that, it's amazing. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. And it's amazing to listen to you too, because that's just one example, and you have example after example of God's faithfulness that just shows up in your life and presents itself. But I think you bring up John Mark's book, Practicing the Way, and one of the things that I like about that book, and that honestly that whole sermon series, is that what they're doing out of Bridgetown is being very intentional to establish what that rhythm actually looks like, right? And being almost prescriptive in the sense of like, this is the rhythm of life. So I'm curious, from your perspective, do you have like almost a formula you've laid out? We've talked about Sabbath, the 30-day period of time. It sounds like you take rest retreats occasionally. But if you were talking to, the generation, Sam and I, to say, this is a rhythm that I would recommend or would lay out, or somebody just to start on this journey, what would be your recommendation?
I would say Sabbath is probably the best place to start. Whether that looks like 24 hours for you the first time, or whether it looks like 4 hours. I think it's getting started. I believe it's supposed to get to 24 hours, and that's really the rhythm of life that God wants us to have. And once you start to get into that rhythm, I actually really start to look forward to it. Sunday's coming up, and I start Saturday night about 6 and end Sunday about 6. And I can't wait to not have to do anything for a full 24 hours and just get to enjoy all the great gifts that God's put into my hands. To enjoy my family, to have a conversation with my daughter without her phone in her hand or my phone in my hand, without the distraction. So I would say start with whatever you can comfortably do now, and grow from there, but put together a strategy of what you want it to look like. Create that, this is how we're going to start Sabbath. This is how we're going to end Sabbath. This is how long it's going to last. And then just kind of grow from there. And then I would say, we're going to spend eternity with God if we're believers, yet we don't spend any time with him right now. I would say take 2 to 3 days sometime, go away for silence, and just journal everything, every idea that comes to your head. My experience has been he repeats things over and over and over again that he wants us to get. For me, it's been enjoy your life, enjoy the journey, enjoy your family. I think we think he wants a bunch of faithful little workers out there doing everything all the time for him, and he wants us to be obedient, but he wants us to have a good time along the way, and he wants us to have a life that other people would look at and say, something's different about that person. There's something they've got that I don't have. They've got some joy that I'm not experiencing. So I think he wants us to have a great time. And if you get away and you give yourself the opportunity for that quiet, I think he's going to give you ideas business-wise you would have never got. You would have missed it. He was probably trying to communicate with you. You just didn't hear it because you didn't get into the right sense. So that has been one of the biggest keys for me, is to get away and really do that. That's what helped change my overall investment strategy that I do with clients. If I wouldn't have taken that time away, that idea I don't believe I would have ever got. And every morning, just take a little bit of time in quiet and journal what ideas are coming to your head. And then go back in 30 days and just look at how many times the same thing was repeated over and over again, and ask yourself why. Why does he keep telling me this same thing? If he's telling me to enjoy the journey all the time, I probably need to have more fun. I'm probably not enjoying life as much as he actually wants me to enjoy it. So I think it's taking the time, it's getting the quiet, it's writing down the ideas that come to your mind, and then it's analyzing that and really saying, what am I supposed to get out of this? And then try to implement whatever that is. If it, rest was another one that I heard over and over again. So that's when I really started to study and dig into the Sabbath and try to figure out, how do I put this practice into play in my life? And now that I'm doing it, it's made a huge, huge difference in the enjoyment and the level that I know my family at. My wife and I have better conversations on Sunday than we have any other day of the week. My kids and I find out things about them that I had no clue about until we get to that day where we know we're not trying to achieve anything.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear your take. Obviously, professionally, you've had a lot of success, continued to have success. And it seems your relationship with God too, you've just developed these systems and these practices to really be able to walk alongside him in relationship with him. How do you take, whether it's the professional side, if it's the faith side, and incorporate in that with your kids? And how do you, and just selfishly, Sam and I both have young children and kind of in the thick of it right now, just trying to make it through, but wanting to have a very intentional relationship with them. And these things we're talking about today, like, want to instill in them as an early of age as possible. So what are some of the things that you do, and how do you encourage your kids and your family to try to move towards a similar sense of practice?
One of the things we do and try to do most of the time on a weekly basis is just open up a proverb and read through a proverb, talk about it. What is the wisdom that we can take out of this to implement in our everyday life? I try to encourage them to read their Bible. And I know they get some of that being at a Christian school, which is, very fortunate for them. But just encouraging them to be in God's word, because that's where they're going to get a lot of their wisdom, and then just spending time with them, trying to set up, maybe playing basketball with my son a little bit, or my daughter, taking her out on a date, setting up a night a week where we go out and we have dinner. It's not perfect. We don't get it done every week, but when we do, we have a great time. I feel like I know her better when we get that time together. So I think it's just making that special. And maybe that's the time when you say yes to stuff you wouldn't normally say yes to. If they want to pop with their meal, absolutely. Have it. Just make it a little bit more enjoyable than normal. And when my kids were younger, sometimes I take them out to breakfast before school, so we could just have a little conversation and get father, daughter, or father-son time. Because when mom's there, it's a great dynamic, but it's just different. And you don't have the same conversations with the kids when there's more than just them there. My daughter opens up to be so much more when it's her and me, as opposed to her, me, and mom. Just how it works, I guess.
Do you feel like implementing some of those practices, day one with them, did you notice with your kids, they got to a certain age where they were responded better to some of those things? What are some of your takeaways on that?
I think once they went to school, they responded really well to getting time alone with their dad.
Okay.
Or their mom. Just them. I think that to me is the key, getting them just to them. And when I take business trips, I try to take one of them with me if I can. Not every trip they make it on, but I'm working a lot of the time, but they're still getting time with me that they never would have gotten had I not taken them along and kind of bunched both of those together, work and enjoyment, because then we've got dinners, just the two of us. We've got breakfast time. We're getting to do all that stuff together that we wouldn't do if I didn't bring them along for that journey.
I love that. We're past our hour here. I want to be respectful. Do you have anything else you want to
I mean, I've got a dozen other things, but I do want to be respectful.
Yeah.
I want to touch on one last thing. How do you in conversations with clients, I think we're all called to serve different purposes. I don't think that I know that. I think that's pretty well documented.
Yep.
There's certain people that are really heavily involved in service. That might be the health industry, or I mean, you're in a service industry. There's other people that are in sales output industries. That rhythm and that design for rest. I think that the Sabbath is a uniform. I agree with you. That's a uniform truth. This 24-hour thing. In conversations, have you had conversations with clients of how that might look different for people in different professions? I mean, we are all in this circle fortunate enough to have a relatively flex schedule, and we have an ability to enjoy some things through work that not everybody on the face of the earth enjoys, and that's something I am miserably. I do not acknowledge that and appreciate that for what it is a lot of times. How do you service that conversation with some of your clients that might, daily 8 to 5, and, how do you find time to get X, Y, and Z done? Because I know that stuff exists. And so I'm just curious, because I'm sure that through your impact investing strategy and things like that, I'm sure some of these conversations arise. So I'm curious how you kind of communicate that with people that aren't in this overtly entrepreneurial sphere, but rather, relatively fixed, because those are two different paradigms.
Yeah. It is a little tougher to do when you have that flexibility to work all the time. If you have to go into the office and do your work there, it's a lot easier to keep it 8 to 5, but with technology now, it's so easy to work all the time. Guys like us that are entrepreneurial, we get all kinds of ideas all the time. Doesn't matter whether it's Sabbath or some other day of the week. And I think we should certainly write that down, but then revisit it later, because I'll get up sometimes on Sabbath and have 3 or 4 ideas. I'll put it into kind of my notes section on my iPad and know that later I'll go back to that. But just getting it down, because I think I got that idea for a reason that day, probably because that was the day that I had the ability to hear it. The other days I'm just moving a little bit too fast to actually hear, the voice that God's trying to communicate to me of what I'm supposed to hear. And that day, because I wake up and I'm like, okay, I don't have to go straight down to the gym and work out and then, and then head straight to the office. I've got a little bit of margin. So I think we write that down, and then we realize at some point, maybe the next day I can get back to it and work on it. And as far as a day of the week to do Sabbath, I think it can be a different day for people too. If some people, are in the healthcare field and they work on Sundays, there's people that need to be cared for on Sundays. So maybe as a family, they pick a different day to do it. Maybe it's Saturday. But sticking to the same day a week, I think, is really important, because it says 6 days for ordinary work, 7th for complete rest. So figuring out what day that is for you and your family, and then sticking to it, and bringing others into it, bringing your friends into it. It's not that you can't hang out with your friends. You're just intentional about not doing your ordinary work during that time period, and share with your friends what you're actually trying to do. The reason that I got the idea, or one of the reasons related to the Sabbath, is my friend who runs Gospel Patrons, called John Reinhardt, told me he was practicing Sabbath. And he said, we usually read a psalm before we get started. I bless the kids, and then we have a great meal together and have good conversation. But share what you're doing on that front, because I think it will encourage other people and really get them to think about the fact it's a good idea, and God created it for us, because he wanted it for us. He wanted us to have rest.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up. And this will be the last thing, and just respect your time and we can kind of get out of here. But I've been more and more convinced, and one of the reasons why we even started this podcast is what you're talking about, like this rhythm of life, and whether it's Sabbath, whether it's rest, or just this relationship with God. I think it was designed to be done in community. And it can feel very isolating, especially in the entrepreneurial world, to try to implement these rhythms when there are individuals, maybe partners or coworkers or a client, who don't want to practice or don't have an interest in practicing those same things. And so I find it incredibly inspirational, and I'm just so grateful for you to talk about these things, to implement these things, because in a lot of ways, like the life I want to build is a life that would somewhat emulate what you have done and what you have built. And to be able to do it in a way that respects the rhythm that God put into this world and for us to live that way, and to still be able to have a great family and to still be an entrepreneur and still have a great business is really inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you so much for sharing these things. And I hope this is not the last conversation we have on it, and continuing to dig deeper and to understand more. And I hope people listening today can just really take time to listen to what you said and start to implement those things in community with other people. So thank you for your time. Very grateful for that. Really appreciate it, and look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, thanks.